The hum of the plane's engines vibrated through the sleek cabin as Malik Jackson sank into the plush leather of his first-class seat. At 29, he was a man on the cusp of something big, a data analyst with a sharp mind and a quiet fire, chasing $1 million contract that could cement his name in a world that hadn't always welcomed him. The ticket was a rare gift from his boss, a pat on the back for the late nights and relentless grit that had gotten him here. He adjusted his tie, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. For once, he felt like he belonged among the champagne flutes and polished briefcases. The flight attendants glided down the aisle, their smiles practiced and warm, offering water or juice to the privileged few. Malik opted for orange juice, the tang cutting through the dry air as he sipped it, letting the cool liquid soothe his parched throat. He pulled a worn paperback from his leather backpack, a sci-fi novel he'd been nursing for weeks, and flipped to the dog-eared page. The world outside faded as he settled in, the seat cradling him like a reward long overdue. For a moment he could breathe. No echoes of skeptical teachers or judgmental stares. Just him, the sky, and a chance to prove himself. But then a ripple of unease broke his peace. Soft murmurs and a sharp gasp pulled his gaze from the page. He glanced up, peering past the rows of cushioned privilege, and saw her Lila Carter, 34, standing unsteady in the aisle. Her dark hair clung to her sweat-damp forehead, one hand gripping the overhead bin as if it were her lifeline, the other cradling a rounded belly that screamed 8 months pregnant. Her breaths came shallow and quick, a wince flickering across her face with every step. Beside her hovered Evan Carter, 35, her husband, his brow creased with worry as he scanned the cabin, silently pleading for help. The first-class crowd shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away, heads bowing to phones or magazines. No one moved. Malik's chest tightened. He'd seen that look before, exhaustion laced with desperation. It reminded him of his mother years ago, juggling 2 jobs and a stubborn kid society had already written off. He didn't think twice. Tucking his book away, he rose, his 6-foot frame unfolding with quiet purpose. The murmurs hushed as he stepped into the aisle, his sneakers silent on the carpeted floor. Lila turned, startled, her hazel eyes wide as they met his. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but steady, "take my seat. You need it more than I do." A small, reassuring smile flickered across his face, nothing flashy, just enough to ease the tension. Lila blinked, caught off guard. "Oh no, I couldn't," she started, but a sudden grimace cut her off, her hand pressing harder against her stomach. Evan stepped closer, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Are you sure? We'd owe you everything." Malik nodded, already slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "I'm sure. I'll be fine in the back." He gestured to the seat, stepping aside as a flight attendant hurried over, her approving nod a quiet echo of his choice. Lila hesitated, then sank into the leather with a sigh that bordered on relief and disbelief. Evan gripped Malik's hand in a quick, firm shake, his "thank you" barely a whisper but heavy with meaning. As Malik wove through the narrow walkway toward coach, he felt the weight of curious stares, some admiring, some puzzled. First-class cabins weren't exactly brimming with faces like his, and he'd grown used to the subtle double takes. But he shrugged it off, squeezing into a cramped seat between 2 burly passengers who barely acknowledged him. The window was his only consolation, a sliver of sky to keep him grounded. He leaned back, the roar of the engine swallowing the chatter, and let his mind drift to the meeting ahead. A contract. A future. That's what mattered. He couldn't have known then, couldn't have dreamed, that this simple act of kindness was a spark about to ignite a firestorm. Lila's grateful smile and Evan's quiet handshake weren't just a fleeting exchange. They were the first threads of a web that would ensnare him in danger, loyalty, and a fight he'd never signed up for. As the plane climbed higher, slicing through the clouds, Malik closed his eyes, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond the horizon, one that would test his courage, unravel secrets, and bind him to strangers in ways he'd never imagined. The airport buzzed with the chaos of weary travelers as Malik Jackson trudged through the terminal, his leather backpack slung over one shoulder. The flight had landed late, and the weight of the cramped coach seat still lingered in his stiff limbs. At 29, he was used to blending into the crowd, head down, purpose clear, but today felt different. His mind replayed the moment on the plane. Lila's trembling relief, Evan's grateful grip. It was nothing, he told himself. Just a seat. Yet something about it stuck, a quiet hum beneath his focus on the million-dollar pitch awaiting him. He joined the sluggish line at a coffee kiosk, rummaging for his wallet, when a voice cut through the din. "Hey, you're the guy from the plane, right?" Malik turned, startled, to find Evan Carter weaving toward him, a nervous grin breaking through his tired features. At 35, Evan had the look of a man stretched thin dark circles under his eyes, a rumpled jacket, but his handshake was firm, warm. "I'm Evan. My wife Lila, you saved her back there. I had to thank you again." Malik waved it off, a shy smile tugging at his lips. "No big deal, man. Glad she's okay." He glanced past Evan, half expecting to see Lila, but the crowd swallowed any sign of her. Evan's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of something heavier, worry, maybe fear. "She's resting at the hotel," he said, as if reading Malik's thoughts. "It's been a rough few weeks. That seat, it meant more than you know." Before Malik could brush it off again, Evan hesitated, then leaned closer, voice dropping. "Look, I don't usually do this, but could we buy you a coffee? Or dinner, even? Lila'd want to thank you herself." And he rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting. "We could use some advice. You're in data, right? I heard you mention it to the flight attendant." Malik's brow furrowed. Advice? He was here to pitch analytics to a tech giant, not play consultant for strangers. But Evan's earnestness, raw and unguarded, tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Sure. Coffee's fine." An hour later, they sat in a quiet corner of a dimly lit bistro just outside the airport. Lila joined them, her steps slow but steady, her hazel eyes brighter now despite the faint strain on her face. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet strength, though her hand rested protectively on her belly. "Malik, right?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm Lila Carter. What you did, I can't tell you how much it helped. The doctor warned me about stress and that flight." She shook her head, a shadow crossing her expression. "Happy to help," Malik replied, sipping his black coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "You both okay now?" Evan exchanged a glance with Lila, a silent conversation passing between them. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Not really," he admitted. "We're in town for more than just a trip. Lila's dad, he died a few months ago. Car crash. The police called it an accident, but..." His voice cracked. "We don't think it was." Malik froze, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" Lila took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around her water glass. "He was a businessman, imports, exports, that kind of thing. Successful but private. After he died, I found his files, financial records, emails. There's stuff that doesn't add up. Money moving in weird ways, names I don't recognize. And then there's Victor Ramseyvic, Dad's old partner. He's been dodging my calls ever since the funeral." Evan pulled a battered USB drive from his pocket and slid it across the table. "We copied what we could. Lila thinks someone's hiding something, maybe even why he died. You're a data guy. Could you look at it? We'd pay you, of course." Malik stared at the drive, his pulse quickening. This wasn't his lane. He'd spent years clawing his way up, proving he was more than the troubled kid teachers had pegged him for. Numbers were his sanctuary, clean, predictable. But this smelled like trouble, murky personal trouble. Yet Lila's eyes, pleading yet fierce, pinned him. And Evan's quiet desperation echoed the voices of people who doubted Malik his whole life. He couldn't walk away. "I'll take a look," he said finally, pocketing the USB. "No promises, though. I've got a big meeting tomorrow." Relief washed over their faces. "Thank you," Lila whispered, her hand brushing Evan's. They swapped numbers, and as Malik left the bistro, the night air hit him like a slap. Back at his hotel, he plugged the drive into his laptop, the screen casting a cold glow across his room. Spreadsheets unfurled, rows of figures, dates, cryptic notes. Then he saw it. Millions funneled through offshore accounts, labeled special shipments. An email, half deleted, caught his eye. "Vic, I know what you're doing. Stop or I'm going to the cops." Sent from Lila's father, dated a week before his crash. Malik's stomach dropped. This wasn't just messy finances. This was a thread-to-live wire sparking with danger. He leaned back, the hum of the hotel's AC filling the silence. He'd wanted to help, sure, but now he was holding a puzzle that could burn him. Outside, the city lights glittered, oblivious to the storm brewing in his hands. He didn't know it yet, but that USB was a key one that would unlock a vault of secrets, draw a knife to his throat, and bind him to Lila and Evan in a fight for truth that none of them were ready for. Malik Jackson's hotel room was a cocoon of shadows, the only light spilling from his laptop screen as it flickered with the damning evidence he'd unearthed. At 29, he'd always trusted numbers to tell the truth, but the ones on Lila's father's USB drive screamed a story he wasn't ready to hear. Millions siphoned through offshore accounts, cryptic notes about special shipments, and that email, "Vic, I know what you're doing. Stop or I'm going to the cops." The words, sent a week before the man's fatal crash, buzzed in Malik's skull like a trapped hornet. He rubbed his eyes, the clock blinking 1:47 a.m. Sleep wasn't an option, not with this. A sharp rap at the door jolted him upright. His pulse spiked, instincts kicking in from years of navigating a world that didn't always feel safe. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. No answer, just another knock, harder, insistent. He grabbed his phone, thumb hovering over Evan's number, and edged toward the door. Through the peephole, a hulking figure loomed, broad shoulders, a scarred cheek glinting under the hall light. Before Malik could react, the door burst open, the cheap lock splintering like dry wood. The man stormed in, a blade flashing in his grip. Malik stumbled back, knocking over a chair as the intruder closed the gap, pinning him against the wall. Cold steel pressed to his throat, the scar-faced thug snarling, "You're digging where you don't belong, kid. Vic says stopper you and that nosy couple won't see next week." His breath reeked of stale cigarettes, eyes wild with menace. Malik's heart hammered, but he forced his voice calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just here for work." The man sneered, pressing the knife harder, just shy of breaking skin. "Don't play dumb. We know what you've got." He yanked the USB from the laptop, tossed it on the floor, and crushed it under his boot. Then he shoved a crumpled note into Malik's chest. "Last warning. Back off or you're all dead." With a final glare, he retreated, the door slamming shut behind him. Malik sank to the floor, breath ragged, the note trembling in his hands. His mind raced. Vic knew. Somehow Vic Ramsey, 57, had eyes on them already. He dialed Evan, the call connecting on the first ring. "Malik? It's late, what's wrong?" Evan's voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened fast as Malik recounted the attack. "Jesus. Are you okay? Lila, she almost got hit by a car today. Black sedan came out of nowhere. She's shaken but safe. What the hell's happening?" Malik's gut twisted. "It's Vic. He's onto us. That email I found, your father-in-law was gonna turn him in. I think Vic's running something dirty, maybe drugs. We're in deep." Silence stretched. Then Evan swore under his breath. "Lila's at the hotel, but she's a wreck. Doctor says stress could hurt the baby. We need to end this." "Give me a day," Malik said, adrenaline surging. "I've got a friend, old college buddy, hacks for a living. He can trace those accounts, maybe dig up more." Evan agreed, voice tight. "Be careful, Malik. Please." By dawn, Malik was on the phone with Jay, a wiry hacker with a knack for cracking systems. "Offshore accounts, huh?" Jay's voice crackled through the call, fingers already flying across keys. "Send me what's left, screenshots, anything. I'll poke around." Hours later, Jay called back, his tone grim. "Bro, this ain't just shady business. Vic's tied to a cartel moving product through shipping routes. And get this, some local cops are on his payroll. Your guy's crash? Might have been a hit." Malik's blood ran cold. A hit? Lila's father hadn't died by chance, he'd been silenced. And now they were targets. He met Evan at the hotel that afternoon, Lila pacing the room, her face pale but fierce. "I knew it wasn't an accident," she whispered, hands cradling her belly. "Dad wouldn't just crash, was careful. Vic killed him, didn't he?" "We don't have proof yet," Malik said. "But Jay's got leads. Shipping manifests, payments enough to suspect drugs. We need hard evidence." Evan clenched his fists. "Then we get it. There's a warehouse, Vic's name's on the lease. If he's moving product, it's there." Lila grabbed Evan's arm. "You're not going alone. I'm coming." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with resolve. Malik hesitated, her pregnancy, the risk, but her glare silenced him. "He took my dad. I'm not sitting this out." That night they drove to the edge of the city, the warehouse looming like a steel beast under a bruised sky. Malik's stomach churned as they slipped through a gap in the fence, the air thick with the tang of oil and rust. Lila moved slower, breathing hard, but her determination held. Evan clutched a flashlight, Malik a phone set to record. They crept toward a stack of crates, prying one open. A glimpse of plastic-wrapped white bricks gleamed inside. "Got it," Malik hissed, hitting record. But Thena Creek. A shadow. Footsteps echoed fast and heavy. Malik's heart leapt to his throat. They weren't alone. The warehouse wasn't just a hideout, it was a trap. And they'd walked right into it. As the beam of a flashlight swept toward them, Malik grabbed Lila's arm, whispering, "Run!" The storm he'd sensed was here, and it was about to break wide open. The warehouse air turned suffocating as Malik Jackson yanked Lila Carter behind a stack of crates, his phone still clutched in a sweaty grip, the recording light blinking red. At 29, he'd never imagined his knack for numbers would land him here, heart pounding, hiding in the dark with the bitter stench of oil and rust stinging his nose. Lila, 34, pressed a hand to her swollen belly, her breath shallow and ragged, while Evan Carter, 35, crouched beside her, flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam they'd seen seconds ago swept closer, footsteps pounding the concrete like a predator's drumbeat. "Stay down," Malik whispered, his voice a tight thread of calm over the panic clawing his chest. The crate they'd pried open packed with plastic-wrapped bricks of white powder loomed as damning proof of Victor Vic Ramsey's empire. Drugs. Cartel-level drugs. Enough to bury the 57-year-old businessman and explain Lila's father's accident. But proof was useless if they didn't make it out alive. A harsh laugh sliced through the silence, chilling Malik's blood. Well, what do we have here?" Vic's voice rasped from the shadows, low and venomous, as he stepped into view. The warehouse lights snapped on, flooding the space in a sickly yellow glow. He stood tall and wiry, gray hair slicked back, a pistol gleaming in his hand. 3 goons flanked him, Scarface from the hotel among them, each gripping a weapon, their eyes glinting with cold intent. Vic tilted his head, smirking. "You 3 really thought you could snoop around my business and walk away?" Lila stiffened, her voice shaking but defiant. "You killed my dad, you bastard. This ends tonight." Vic's smirk widened, his gun swinging lazily toward her. "Your old man was a fool, thought he could threaten me and live. You're just a stupid sweetheart. And you," his gaze locked on Malik, dark and piercing. "Should have stayed in your lane, kid. Now you're all dead." Evan lunged forward, shielding Lila. "Leave her out of this." But a goon slammed him down with a brutal shove, his flashlight clattering across the floor. Malik's mind raced, outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. He scanned the warehouse. Crates, a forklift, a rusted chain dangling from a pulley overhead. No clear exit. Just seconds to act. "Run when I say," he hissed to Lila and Evan, then grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground. With a yell, he hurled it at Vic, the clang echoing as it grazed the man's shoulder. Vic cursed, staggering, his shot going wild, cracking into a crate. Chaos erupted. Malik charged, tackling Scarface before the thug could aim. They hit the ground hard, Malik's fist slamming into the man's jaw. Pain flared in his knuckles, but he wrestled the knife free, kicking it away. "Malik!" Evan shouted, dragging Lila toward the shadows as the other 2 goons fired. Bullets ricocheted off steel, sparks flying. Malik rolled behind a crate, chest heaving, and spotted a stack of boxes teetering above Vic. He grabbed a fallen crowbar, adrenaline surging, and swung it at the forklift's controls. The machine lurched, a chain snapping loose, boxes crashed down, burying one goon in an avalanche of splintered wood and dust. Vic roared, firing blindly through the haze. "You're done, you hear me?" A bullet grazed Malik's arm, hot and searing, but he gritted his teeth, shoving Evan and Lila toward a side door. "Gano!" Lila stumbled, a cry escaping her as a contraction hither, baby choosing the worst moment to demand life. Evan scooped her up, desperation fueling his strength, and they burst outside into the night. Malik followed, but a hand clamped his ankle. Scarface, bloodied but alive, yanking him back. He kicked free, scrambling to his feet as Vic's shadow loomed closer, gun raised. "No one crosses me," Vic snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. Malik dove, grabbing a fallen plank and swinging it with everything he had. It cracked against Vic's wrist, the gun skittering across the floor. Vic howled, clutching his arm, and Malik bolted, his phone still recording tucked in his pocket. Outside, the cold bit into his lungs as he caught up to Evan and Lila, huddled by the car. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the shots. "You okay?" Malik panted, blood trickling down his arm. Lila nodded, tears streaking her face, one hand on her belly. Evan gripped his shoulder, voice hoarse. "You saved us. Again." Malik pulled out his phone, the screen cracked but the video intact. Grainy footage of the drugs, Vic's threats, the chaos. "This'll bury him," he said, resolve hardening. "But we can't trust the local cops," Jay said. "They're dirty. I know a reporter. She'll blow this wide open." As the sirens grew louder, they piled into the car, tires screeching as Evan floored it. The warehouse shrank in the rearview, a tomb of secrets they just cracked open. Malik clutched the phone, his arm throbbing, knowing they dodged death by inches. Vic's empire was crumbling, but the war wasn't over, not yet. The night swallowed them, a fragile trio bound by blood, bravery, and a recording that could light the fuse to justicer their graves. The car's headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom as Malik Jackson slumped against the back seat, his arm throbbing where Vic's bullet had grazed him. At 29, he'd never felt so alive or so exhausted. Blood stained his sleeve, a crimson badge of the night's chaos, but his grip on the cracked phone was iron tight. The video, shaky, raw, undeniable, held Vic's snarling threats and the glint of those drug-packed crates. Beside him, Lila Carter, 34, clutched Evan's hand, her breath steadying despite the contractions that had gripped her in the warehouse. Evan, 35, kept his eyes on the road, jaw set, driving them away from the steel jaws of Vic Ramsey's trap. They didn't stop until they reached a diner on the city's edge, its neon sign flickering like a weary beacon. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and grease grounded them as Malik sent the video to Priya, a college friend turned investigative reporter with a nose for corruption. "This better work," he muttered, wincing as Lila pressed a napkin to his wound. Her hazel eyes, fierce despite the strain, met his. "It will. You got us this far." By sunrise, Priya called back, her voice electric. "Malik, this is dynamite." Vic's voice, "The drugs, it's all there. I'm blasting it online now. Cops can't bury this if the world's watching." Within hours, the video exploded across social media, hashtags trending, newsrooms scrambling. Vic's empire, built on blood and lies, began to crack. The FBI swooped in, sidestepping the local precinct's dirty hands. Search warrants hit the warehouse, unearthing kilos of cocaine, falsified manifests, and a paper trail tying Vic to Lila's father's accident, a brake line cut. A murder dressed as chance. But victory came with a price. As the feds raided Vic's world, Lila's contractions surged. Evan rushed her to the hospital, Malik trailing behind, his arm now bandaged but his nerves raw. He paced the waiting room, the sterile hum of machines a stark contrast to the warehouse's chaos. Hours later, Evan emerged, tears streaking his tired face, a grin breaking through. "It's a boy. Healthy. Lila's okay, she's asking for you." In the room, Lila cradled a tiny bundle, her exhaustion eclipsed by a mother's glow. "Malik," she said, voice soft but steady. "Meet little Malik Carter." His throat tightened, the weight of the name hitting him like a wave. "You didn't have to," he started, but Evan clapped his shoulder. "Yeah, we did. You're family now." Days later, Vic and his crew were a rain Scarface glaring from the dock, Vic's smirk gone, replaced by a hollow stare. The evidence was ironclad. Murder, trafficking, corruption. Lila testified, her voice trembling but unbroken, clearing her father's name. He'd been a victim, not a villain, coerced by Vic until he dared to fight back. The gavel fell, locking Vic away for decades. The storm was over. Malik returned home, the $1 million contract HISA triumph he'd earned with sleepless nights and a pitch honed to perfection. His boss beamed, colleagues toasted, but the victory felt different now. The kid who'd once shrunk from the world had faced down a gun, saved a family, toppled a kingpin. He kept the battered novel from that first flight, its pages a quiet reminder of where it start. Eat a seat given up. A spark struck. He stayed close with Lila and Evan, their text lighting his phone. Baby Malik's first smile, a blurry photo of Lila laughing in a park. Months later, an invitation arrived, Lila's sister's wedding. Malik flew out, stepping into a church alive with music and warmth. Lila hugged him tight, little Malik toddling at her side, clutching a toy plane. "You're the reason we're here," she whispered. Evan grinned, adding, "Don't argue, man. It's true." At the reception, Malik watched the dance floor swirl, a glass of punch in hand. Lila joined him, her eyes reflective. "That day on the plane I was terrified, complications, stress. Your seat gave me a breather. Then you gave us everything else." She squeezed his arm. "You proved kindness isn't weak, it's a weapon." Malik nodded, the words sinking deep. Back home, he started volunteering, mentoring kids like he'd been kids the world overlooked. Each small act echoed that first one, rippling outward. Years passed, but the bond held: holiday cards, a call when baby Malik said his first word, "Plane." It always traced back to that moment, a single choice that rewrote their fates. As Malik boarded another flight first class again, a perk of success scanned the cabin, not with suspicion but with quiet openness. No one needed his seat today, but he'd give it in a heartbeat. The plane soared and he smiled, orange juice in hand, knowing one spark of compassion had lit a fire that burned through darkness, forged friendships, and left a legacy named after him. And so Malik Jackson's wild ride from a first-class seat to a showdown with a drug lord psycho ends with a baby named after him, a friendship forged in fire, and a quiet pride that no contract could buy. But here's the kicker. This isn't just some dusty tale from a sci-fi novel he lugged around. It's a neon sign flashing in our faces today, March 23, 2025. Yep. Right now, as you're scrolling X or dodging spoilers about the latest AI drama. Kindness isn't dead. It's just waiting for you to hit the activate button. Think about it. Malik could have stayed glued to his plush seat, sipping OJ like a king, ignoring Lila's wobbly aisle dance. But he didn't. One move and boom, lives saved, bad guys busted, and a kid with his name toddling around. In 2025, we're all one click from chaos or connection. That stranger struggling with groceries at the store? That coworker drowning in deadlines? Your tiny "hey, need a hand?" could be their lifeline of yours. No capes required, just a shred of guts. Here's the funny part. If Malik had known he'd end up dodging bullets and playing warehouse ninja, he might have said, "Nah fam, I'm good, I'll stick to Excel and chill." But life's got a twisted sense of humor. It throws you curveballs, then hands you the bat. Lesson: don't wait for the perfect moment to be decent. It's usually the messy ones that count. So next time you're tempted to scroll past someone's cry for help online or IRL, remember, even a retweet can spark a revolution. Just don't expect a baby named after you unless you're really clutch. What about you? Ever had a random act of kindness blow up into something wild, good or bad? Drop it in the comments. I'm dying to hear your chaos stories. And hey, if you vibed with Malik's saga, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. We've got more twists, heart, and whoa, didn't see that coming tales coming your way. Don't miss out unless you're cool with letting Vic types run the show. Your call.